Hi, I'm Katie from Kimberbell, and today we are going to start sewing our Pumpkins and Potions quilt together. Sewing together a quilt can be really daunting, so we're just going to take it one section at a time. I am going to sew section 1 together with you and give you some of my tips and tricks, and then I encourage you to just take it one section at a time, and eventually you will have a completed quilt. So in your instructions, you will see a page like this where it shows section 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it will break it down step by step of which blocks to sew together first, as well as it'll show you a diagram of which blocks will lay next to each other and how they'll all go together. So we will start here with our Stitch and Spell block and our Ghost 1 block, and we are going to sew them together. So I've got my blocks here. Move these off to the side. We've got our blocks here. I'm just going to take my Ghost 1 block and lay it right down over top of our Stitch and Spell block. I'm going to line up my corners and my edges here. And there's a couple of different ways that you can attach these to. I like using pins, but you can also use clips. You can pin it a different way, or if you want to just wing it, you are more than welcome to do that. Sometimes I do that too if it's something I want to sew together fast. So I'm going to pin these two together. I'm going to start at the edges and then I'm going to pin the center. These blocks are pretty small, so really that's all of the pinning that I feel like I need to do. I'm going to start here at my top corner and with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, which happens to just be about where this thick black line is. I'm going to just start at this corner and we're going to do a back stitch and then I'll just continue sewing it together. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start a little ways in. I'm not going to start exactly on my edge because that will get caught down inside of my sewing machine and make things really hard. So I'm just going to start a little ways in. Oh, okay, so we've sewn a little ways in. I'm going to hit my back stitch button and we're going to go close to the end and then keep going forward. As I get to my pins, I'm going to take them out so that I don't hit my needle with them. I want to make sure to keep my right edge lined up as I sew my straight line so that my seams come out being really straight and they don't come out looking wiggly or wonky or anything. So I've got my 1/4 inch line right here. It might be hard to see, but I've got my 1/4 inch line. It comes all the way down here to help me stay aligned the whole way down. So that's what I'm going to keep my block steady with this hand here. And we're just going to sew straight, and I'm going to use this hand to keep this aligned with that 1/4 inch. I'm getting close to this pin, so I'm going to take that out. As I get to the end, I'm going to sew. I've got probably 1/8 of an inch left. I'm going to hit my back stitch button again and go back a few stitches, and then I'm just going to sew all the way off of my block. Now we have our 2 blocks sewn together and we can move on to our step 2, which is to sew the Flying Geese 1 block to the Itsy Bitsy Problem block. So we are going to take these 2 blocks, we're going to swap these out, and our diagram shows them like this. So I am right-handed. I like going right to left with these, but you can also go left to right and sew with your block this way. To keep things simple for myself, I'm going to flip this block on top of my Flying Geese block, and then again, just line up my edges. And let's pin those in place. Pin my edges and then my center again. All right, we can go ahead and sew these. All right, and again, use your back stitch button. We don't want those seams to come out, so we're gonna make sure that they are in there pretty well. Okay, and our next step, step 3, is going to be sew the Stitch and Spell unit to the Flying Geese 1 unit. So the block that the piece that we have just sewn together and the one that we sewed a few minutes ago, we're going to sew those together. So on the back of your block, every block that you sew together, you are going to have a seam. Here, we've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There are a couple of different ways that you can deal with these seams. You can press them open like this. Some people find it easier to do that rather than pressing them to the side. Or you can press them to either side. You can press them to the left, you can press them to the right. In this situation, I'm gonna press my seams open. It's gonna make sewing my quilt together a little bit easier because I don't have to worry about trying to nest my seams or making sure they're all ironed one way or the other. I'm just going to press them open, and that will make things a little bit easier for us. So now I have pressed my seams open. Let's go ahead and sew these 2 sections together. I'm just going to flip this over top of my bottom section, and then same as we did before, I am going to line up my edges here and pin them together. Sometimes if you've taken a bigger seam on one side than the other, your blocks won't line up. Your sections, one will be a little bit longer than the other, and that's okay. It's easy to fix. You'll just take in your smaller seam, just make it just a little bit bigger, and then your block should line up a little bit easier. So I've pinned my edges, I'm gonna pin my center. And because these blocks are quilted, they're a little bit stiff, which is really nice because then my fabric isn't gonna shift as easy. So I'm not too worried about pinning in here, but if they weren't quilted, if it was just fabric, then I would definitely pin a few more times in here. Let's go ahead and get this sewn together. Okay, awesome. So we've got those 2 sections sewn together. Now your next 2 steps are going to be to sew these 2 blocks together and then to attach it to this one, which is exactly the same as sewing these together. You've got section 1 done. Now go ahead and try your other few sections and put your quilt together. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy making your Pumpkins and Potions quilt.